The judge just told Sean Diddy Combs, "Your good works can't wash away this record," then dropped 50 months behind bars and a $500,000 fine. But the real shock is how he got there and what it means next. In this video, I'll reveal the one courtroom line that flipped the sentence, the exact math on how much time he'll actually serve after credit, the appeal trap nobody's talking about, and the quiet moment in court that cameras missed. If you're tired of rumors and want receipts plus clear breakdowns, subscribe to Fame Insight right now, like this video, drop a comment, justice or too light, and share it. Help us smash our first 1,000 subs, so we can keep bringing you inside the room. Are you with me? Because the twist that headlines got wrong is coming up in seconds, and it changes everything about Diddy's future. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Judge Subramanian walked into the courtroom, and the entire atmosphere shifted instantly. Reporters leaned forward, attorneys straightened their papers, and even Diddy himself looked uneasy. The judge began with what sounded almost like praise. "Mr. Combs, you are a self-made artist who has inspired a community of color. But if you've watched enough high-profile sentencing hearings, you already know what's coming next." When a judge starts with the positives, it usually means there's a heavy butt waiting right around the corner. And that's exactly what happened here. The judge made it clear Diddy would not be sentenced for racketeering or sex trafficking, the charges he was acquitted of. Instead, his punishment would fall strictly under federal statute 355-3, which focuses on the nature of the crimes, the history of the defendant, and the need for deterrence. Think about that for a moment. The judge was signaling, "Yes, I see your accomplishments, but I also see the other side of your life. The darker side." Now here's the crucial point. This wasn't about a single night, a one-time lapse in judgment, or one mistake. The judge stressed this was a pattern, a lifestyle. That changes everything, because when it comes to sentencing, judges weigh not just what happened, but how consistently it happened. And in Diddy's case, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Are you still with me? Because what came next was the beginning of a very public unraveling of Diddy's image, and the judge wasted no time in ripping into the reality of what those lifestyle choices meant for the victims. After setting the stage with compliments, Judge Subramanian pivoted sharply. He looked directly at Sean Diddy Combs and made it crystal clear. A history of good works cannot wash away the record in this case. And then he laid it out. You abused these women. You used that abuse to get your way. The evidence of that abuse is massive. This wasn't vague. The judge wasn't talking in generalities. He pointed to specifics: freak-offs, hotel nights, documented abuse, and testimony that painted a picture of ongoing manipulation and violence. Now pause for a second and think about what that means. Judges don't just rely on courtroom theatrics. They sift through mountains of evidence, transcripts, testimony, and even sealed documents that juries often never see. The judge emphasized, "I was sitting right here during the testimony." That line is so important because it shows he wasn't relying solely on legal memos or summaries. He was watching the victims in real time, listening to their voices crack, seeing their body language, and weighing the credibility of every word. This is the part where Diddy's defense team's carefully crafted strategy started to collapse. Their argument had leaned heavily on his accomplishments, his family life, his community influence. But here's the thing. When a judge has personally witnessed overwhelming testimony of abuse, no amount of charity concerts or community programs can outweigh that. It's also worth noting, this wasn't a case of one mistake or a bad night. The judge stressed over and over that this was systematic behavior. That's why the sentencing range ballooned so much. So while the defense wanted 14 months, the judge was making it obvious this wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist. And here's the transition you need to keep in mind. If the judge had stopped there, Diddy might have been looking at a reduced sentence. But what happened next pushed everything further out of his favor, because once the judge turned to deterrence, that is, the need to send a message not just to Diddy but to anyone else who might abuse their power, things got even more serious. This is where the judge's tone shifted from observation to action. Judge Subramanian made it clear, a significant sentence is required to deter. Let's break down why that matters. Sentencing isn't only about punishing the person in front of the court. It's about sending a message to everyone watching. And in a high-profile case like this, the ripple effect is massive. The judge pointed out something critical. After Cassie's civil lawsuit, after Diddy's so-called apology video, after the public backlash, you'd think that would have been enough to change his behavior, but it wasn't. Even after the spotlight was on him, there were brutal hotel incidents. One of the most shocking references the judge made was about Jane. He said Diddy punched her in the head during a hotel encounter, and that he kept using his power, his money, and drugs to control the situation. And this is why deterrence became central, because the judge wasn't convinced by Diddy's performative apologies. He wasn't convinced this behavior wouldn't continue. He said essentially, "If you can't stop yourself, I'll be the one to stop you." That's a powerful moment. And it's also a turning point in the sentencing, because it sets the stage for why the judge refused the defense's request for just 14 months. The court wasn't going to let Diddy walk away lightly, not when the pattern of abuse was so ingrained. Here's the bigger takeaway. The judge framed this case not just as a personal reckoning for Sean Combs, but as a public statement that exploitation and violence against women cannot be brushed aside, no matter how famous or powerful the defendant is. And that's why at this moment in court, everyone knew Diddy wasn't leaving that building a free man. Now let's dive into the part everyone leans in for, the math of sentencing. Here's what happened. The prosecution argued for 135 months. That's over 11 years behind bars. They said the evidence, the testimony, the patterns of abuse made it clear. Nothing less would deliver justice. The defense? They swung in the opposite direction. They asked for 14 months time served. 14 months, and then freedom. Their argument was that Diddy's good works, his family support, his influence in the community, should outweigh the testimony of abuse and misconduct. And here's where the judge drew the line. He said point blank, 135 months is more than necessary. 14 months is not sufficient. Let that sink in for a second. The court wasn't going to give in to the extreme ends. Instead, Judge Subramanian positioned himself in the middle, weighing everything: the guidelines, the probation office's recommendation of 5-7 years, the prosecution's push for 11, and the defense's plea for leniency. But remember, this wasn't just about numbers. This was about credibility. If the judge went too soft, it would look like fame and money bought a lighter sentence. If he went too hard, it might give the defense grounds for appeal. So what did he do? He made it clear that Diddy's good works could not erase what the testimony revealed. The abuse was real, it was repeated, and it was destructive. And here's the key suspense point. As the courtroom leaned forward, the judge finally prepared to announce a sentence that rejected both extremes. But before we reveal the final number, ask yourself this. With the prosecution, the moment Judge Subramanian delivered the sentence, the courtroom was frozen in time. For a split second, no one moved. Then, like a wave, the reactions began. Diddy sat stone-faced, but observers in the room said you could see the tension in his jaw, the slight shake in his hands. His defense team leaned in, whispering urgently, already framing the decision as a partial victory. Remember, they had pushed hard for just 14 months. He didn't walk free, but avoiding an 11-year sentence? That's something they'll spin as a win. On the other side, prosecutors exchanged sharp nods. They didn't get the maximum, but they knew the message had landed. The judge had publicly acknowledged the seriousness of the testimony, the years of abuse, the lifestyle of exploitation, and made it clear this wasn't just about one night or one mistake. Meanwhile, the gallery buzzed. Some victims' advocates were visibly disappointed, whispering that 4 years wasn't enough. Others said they were relieved that accountability finally caught up to a man once seen as untouchable. And here's the moment that tells you everything. As the marshals prepared to escort Diddy out, he glanced back at the benches. For the first time, his composure slipped. He looked smaller. Not the mogul, not the icon, just another man facing years in federal prison. But the courtroom is just the beginning. The real ripple effects were already spreading beyond those four walls. The media outside, the fans on social media, even Diddy's inner circle. Everyone was waiting to react. And that's where we're heading next. In Section 7, we'll break down how the world outside the courthouse responded. The silence, the shock, and the voices that immediately demanded more answers. Pushing for 11 years and the defense begging for 14 months. What would you expect the judge to hand down? Stick with me, because in Section 5, we're going to unpack the moment the gavel dropped, the 50-month sentence, and what it really means for Diddy's future. The room fell silent. Every eye was on Judge Subramanian. After weeks of speculation, months of legal battles, and years of rumors surrounding Sean Diddy Combs, this was it, the moment that would define his future. The judge's voice cut through the silence. The sentence is 50 months of incarceration. That's just over 4 years in federal prison. And here's the detail most people miss. Diddy has already served about 14 months while awaiting sentencing. That means he's looking at roughly 3 more years behind bars, assuming good behavior. But that wasn't all. Judge Subramanian also hit him with a $500,000 fine, meant to cover the costs of his incarceration. No restitution was ordered to the victims, but there were forfeitures outlined in the official documents. On top of that, a $5,000 statutory fine and a $200 special assessment fee were added. Now think about what just happened here. The prosecution argued for 11 years, the defense begged for 14 months, and the probation office recommended 5 to 7 years. The judge came down in the middle, 4 years, sending a message that he was not going to be swayed by extremes on either side. And here's where it gets interesting. Some legal analysts are already calling this a win for Diddy. Why? Because in the grand scheme, 4 years is far less than what the prosecution demanded demanded, and far less than the maximum sentence that was on the table. But don't be fooled. The judge made it clear, this sentence is not a pass. His words cut deep. Exploitation and violence against women must be met with real accountability to promote respect for the law. That means the court wanted to send a message. Your fame, your money, your legacy doesn't put you above the law. So here's the big question. Does 4 years in prison feel like true justice, or does it feel like the system gave him a break? Hold that thought, because in Section 6, we're gonna break down how the courtroom reacted in real time, from the defense team's relief to whispers of appeal, to what this means for Diddy's family and career. The fallout started the second those words left the judge's mouth. While the courtroom absorbed the weight of the sentence, outside was a different story. The streets around the courthouse had been buzzing with anticipation all morning. Supporters, critics, reporters, and curious onlookers, all waiting to see how justice would fall. But here's the twist. When word broke that Diddy had been sentenced to 50 months, just over 4 years, the reaction wasn't explosive. It wasn't cheering, it wasn't chanting. It was silence. Reporters described the scene as eerie. No free Diddy chants, no loud applause for justice, just shock. Supporters who expected him to walk out today looked stunned. Victims' advocates who wanted a harsher penalty frowned and whispered to each other. Even fans with posters and cameras seemed frozen, as though nobody knew how to respond. Why? Because this sentence landed right in the middle. Not a complete victory for the prosecution. Not the walk of freedom the defense had fought for. It was gray, it was complicated, and it left people on both sides unsatisfied. But silence doesn't last long. Within minutes, phones came out, live streams lit up, and hashtags started trending worldwide. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, every platform was flooded with one question: was justice served? And while the public debated, one group was already planning their next move: Diddy's legal team. They didn't waste time. Even as supporters processed the outcome, whispers of an appeal began spreading. His lawyers were already preparing their narrative. 4 years is too long, the case was flawed, and Diddy should be home sooner. This set the stage for what would come next, not just the prison term, but the legal chess match over his future. And that's where we're headed in Section 8, the defense's next move. How Diddy's team is spinning this as a win, what they might argue on appeal, and how this sentence could shape his comeback strategy. Inside the courtroom, as the judge's words settled, all eyes turned to Diddy's legal team. They weren't shocked, they were ready. From the moment prosecutors asked for 11 years, the defense had been preparing to frame anything less as a win, and in their eyes, 50 months was just that. Their message was clear: he beat the worst charges. He didn't get the decade prosecutors demanded, and 4 years? That's survivable. Almost immediately, one of his lawyers hinted at appeal territory. They argued that the sentence didn't line up with comparable cases, that enhancements had unfairly inflated the guidelines, and that the judge weighed testimony too heavily. In other words, they were planting the seeds that this wasn't over. But here's the manipulation at play. While they discussed legal strategy, they were also building a public narrative. They knew cameras were rolling, microphones were waiting. So they leaned into the family man image, pointing to his children, his charitable work, his years of influence in music. They wanted the headlines to read, Diddy the father, Diddy the mentor, Diddy the builder of communities, not just Diddy the convicted defendant. And this wasn't just about lawyers, it was about timing. Every word spoken was meant to control the media cycle, to paint his prison term not as an end, but as a pause before the comeback. But here's the catch. While the defense was smiling for cameras, prosecutors were sharpening their response. They weren't going to let the narrative slip away so easily. And that brings us directly into Section 9. The prosecution fires back. How when the sentence was handed down, 50 months behind bars and a $500,000 fine. It wasn't just about Sean Diddy Combs. It was about what this case represents. For decades, celebrities like Diddy have lived in a world where money, fame, and influence acted as a shield. Allegations could be buried, stories could be bought, and power often meant protection. But this sentencing marks a cultural shift. The message is that no matter how big your name is, you are not untouchable. Think about it. This wasn't just a one-day crime. As the judge made clear, this was a pattern, a lifestyle. And that's what makes this so important. Because when a court acknowledges a pattern, it signals to other powerful figures that their entire history, not just one moment, can define their fate. But there's more. This case is now part of a larger timeline, where we've seen music moguls, Hollywood icons, and athletes all face similar reckonings. It's part of a cultural movement demanding accountability in spaces where silence once dominated. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Fans, media, and even entire industries helped build and protect this image of untouchable power. So this sentencing isn't just about punishing Diddy, it's about forcing society to reflect. How many warning signs were ignored? How many times did fame outweigh accountability? And here's where it hits hardest. honest. This isn't just a story about a celebrity downfall, it's about a legacy redefined. Instead of being remembered solely for the music, the empire, and the influence, Diddy will now forever be linked to this conviction. But before we close, there's one final question we have to face. What comes next for Diddy and for the culture that created him? Government justified its case, why they believed 4 years wasn't enough, and the key message they wanted the world to hear. If Diddy's team tried to spin this as a win, the prosecution was quick to remind everyone, 4 years in federal prison is no slap on the wrist. Minutes after the judge handed down the sentence, government attorneys stood outside the courthouse, delivering their message loud and clear. They stressed that this wasn't about celebrity, status, or fame. It was about accountability. They pointed directly to the testimony of the women, the disturbing pattern of abuse, and the fact that even after being investigated, Diddy continued the same behavior. Their statement boiled down to this: the system worked, the jury convicted, the evidence was overwhelming, and now there's real punishment. But they didn't stop there. They wanted the public to remember just how close Diddy had come to facing a much harsher fate. Had the racketeering and trafficking charges stuck, he wouldn't be looking at 4 years. He'd be looking at decades. For prosecutors, this sentence wasn't leniency, it was balance. They positioned it as proof that even powerful men eventually face consequences. And here's the key manipulation point. Prosecutors reframed the sentence. Instead of letting the defense call it a victory, they painted it as the beginning of justice, not the end. They wanted headlines to reflect that the victims were finally heard, and that 4 years is 4 years too many for a man who once lived above the law. The battle wasn't just in court, it was in public perception. Both sides knew that whatever narrative stuck in the first 48 hours would define how the world remembers this moment. But what about the people outside the courthouse? The fans, the critics, the protesters, the ones who had been waiting for this day? Their reaction told another story entirely, and that takes us into Section 10, the public's reaction, the split between those celebrating accountability and those still rallying behind Diddy. As the news broke, 50 months in prison, plus $500,000 in fines, the courthouse steps turned into a stage for raw emotion. On one side, you had supporters, fans shouting "Free Diddy," holding up posters with his face, arguing that the justice system went too far. Some said it was a setup. Others claimed the government was making an example out of him. To them, this wasn't justice, it was persecution. But on the other side, the energy was completely different. Advocates for victims, survivors of abuse, and everyday people who had followed the trial closely were calling the sentence a victory. They said this was a turning point, that no amount of money, fame, or status should shield anyone from accountability. And then there was the silence. Those who simply watched from the sidelines, phones out, recording history in real time. Because make no mistake, this moment will be replayed across TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and every major news outlet for weeks. The split was clear. To some, 4 years was too much, but to many, it wasn't nearly enough. This duality, the clash of loyalty versus accountability, shows exactly why this case is so monumental. It's not just about Diddy anymore. It's about the culture of power, the influence of celebrity, and whether the justice system can rise above it. But beyond the noise of the crowd, something else was happening inside the courthouse. Something more strategic, more calculated, the defense preparing their next move. And that leads us directly into Section 11, the defense's next steps. Even as the gavel came down, Diddy's legal team was already pivoting. They didn't look defeated, they looked prepared. Because in the world of high-profile trials, sentencing day isn't the end. It's just the beginning of the next battle. Sources close to the defense have hinted at appeal strategies. Their main argument? That the sentence was influenced by evidence and testimony not directly tied to the charges of conviction. Remember, the judge himself clarified Diddy was not being sentenced for racketeering or trafficking, yet those allegations still echoed throughout the courtroom, shaping the tone and outcome. His attorneys are likely to argue that this creates unfair prejudice, that Diddy is being punished for accusations he wasn't convicted of. If they can convince an appellate court, they could shave years off his sentence, maybe even get a retrial on certain counts. But beyond the legal chessboard, there's another layer here: public image management. Expect carefully crafted statements from his PR team, highlighting his role as a father, a community leader, and a man who, in their words, is being unfairly targeted. And let's be honest, Diddy knows the power of narrative. His team is going to fight this battle on two fronts, in the courts and in the court of public opinion. They'll lean into his legacy, his achievements, and frame this as an overreach. But here's the real question you should be asking yourself: will this strategy work in 2025? With social media dissecting every move, with survivors' voices amplified like never before, can a PR spin still control the narrative? Or will it backfire and make the sentence and the stigma even harder to escape? And while Diddy's lawyers play their cards, prosecutors aren't exactly backing down either. They've got their own next move. If Diddy's defense team is preparing for appeals, the prosecution is preparing for war. And make no mistake, they're not going to let this case slip through their fingers. From the start, prosecutors painted a picture of a pattern of abuse and power, not just a one-time mistake. And while Judge Subramanian was careful to clarify that sentencing was not for racketeering or other dismissed charges, the prosecution made sure those allegations were in the room, shaping how the judge viewed Diddy's history. Now their strategy moving forward is clear: lock in the narrative of accountability. They're expected to release statements reinforcing that the 50-month sentence wasn't just about numbers, it was about protecting future victims and sending a message that power doesn't equal immunity. Behind the scenes, they'll also prepare to defend this sentence against appeal. That means ensuring every piece of evidence, every testimony, every enhancement in the sentencing calculation is airtight. They know Diddy's lawyers will try to poke holes in the guidelines, so they're already building their shield. But here's where it gets interesting. Prosecutors also have a longer-term advantage. The investigations into Diddy's past behavior don't necessarily stop with this trial. If new witnesses come forward, or if civil cases uncover more evidence, those could keep this story alive in ways the defense can't control. And this leads us to the chilling reality: even if Diddy's lawyers manage to cut his time down, the stain of these proceedings doesn't disappear. The prosecution has done what they set out to do: cement his name in a timeline of accountability. But what happens when the media cycle shifts? When this case becomes part of a larger cultural conversation about celebrity, power, and justice? Now that the sentence has been set, 50 months in prison and a $500,000 fine, the question everyone is asking is simple: what happens next? Diddy's defense team has already hinted at the possibility of an appeal. They're expected to argue that the enhancements used to calculate his sentence were unfair and that the probation office overstated the seriousness of his conduct. But appeals are not easy to win. The fact that the judge went below the prosecution's request makes it harder for the defense to claim bias or excessive punishment. Then there's the matter of time served. With 14 months already behind him and the possibility of good behavior credits, he could serve closer to 3 years, or even less, before walking free. That's a huge difference compared to the 11 years prosecutors fought for. But while the legal strategy unfolds, another battle is just beginning: the fight for reputation. Diddy built an empire on being larger than life, an artist, entrepreneur, and cultural force. Now every headline is tied to his conviction. Will the public ever separate the music from the scandals? Or will this sentence cement his downfall permanently? There's also the industry fallout. Major labels, streaming platforms, and business partners will all have to decide how closely they want to be tied to Diddy moving forward. Some may quietly cut ties, while others may wait and see if he can stage a comeback once released. And that's the question hovering over all of this: is a comeback even possible? For some artists, prison time has been a setback they've spun into redemption. For others, it marked the end. Right now, it's too soon to know which path Diddy will take. But here's what we do know: his next steps, every appeal, every statement, every business move, will be watched closely by fans, critics, and the industry. Because this isn't just about Diddy's sentence. It's about whether a man who once controlled the culture can survive a downfall of this scale. And that brings us to the final question: what does this case really leave behind? That's where we go in Section 15, the final verdict on Diddy's legacy. So now we've reached the end of the road, at least for now. 4 years behind bars, a $500,000 fine, and a legacy rewritten in front of the world. For decades, Diddy represented ambition, hustle, and success. He was the face of hip-hop's rise into the global mainstream, a businessman who built an empire from nothing. But today, none of that is the headline. Instead, his name is tied to a conviction, a sentencing, and a courtroom that reminded everyone, not even the most powerful are above accountability. This isn't just about prison time. This is about the collapse of an image, the unraveling of a myth, and the hard truth that behind the glitz and the money, there was a darker story. The judge's words made it clear: a history of good works cannot wash away years of abuse. And in that moment, Diddy's story became a cautionary tale. So here's the question I'll leave with you: is this the end of Diddy's legacy, or the start of an even bigger fall? Will he serve his time, walk free, and attempt a comeback? Or has this moment ensured that no matter what happens next, his name will forever carry the weight of scandal? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: when the sentence was read, the music stopped, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any beat Diddy ever produced. And that's where we leave it for now. This was Fame Insight, bringing you the full breakdown. If you're still with me at this point, you're the real ones. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with someone who needs to see the truth laid out clearly. We're pushing for our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you makes that possible. So what do you think? Was this sentence fair, or did Diddy get off easy? Let me know in the comments below, because this conversation isn't ending here. Until next time, stay tuned, stay sharp, and stay insightful. And with that, the gavel has fallen. The courtroom is closed, the cameras are off, and Diddy now faces the reality of prison walls instead of platinum plaques. But remember, this case isn't just about one man. It's about accountability, it's about power, and it's about the message it sends. No amount of fame, money, or influence can erase the truth when it finally comes to light. If you've watched until this point, you've just taken in the complete story. The evidence, the sentencing, the breakdown of what went down inside.